Hey, it's Alabama Annie with part 21 of the Starlight Tavern, one of my books available on Kindle. Over summer, there had been a lot of guests at the tavern. There had been families who stayed when they dropped their children off at one of the summer camps on the mountain. These camps lasted for 4 weeks, and I really wanted to go to one of them, but they were very, very expensive. When Lenny and I would be at the river with our friends behind the tavern swimming or fishing, these camp children would come floating past in their canoes, singing camp songs and laughing, and we would see them sometimes hiking the trails in the forest, dressed like Indians and cowboys, with their faces painted, and it all looked like great fun. That summer, though, one of the boys attending camp disappeared from the bunkhouse one evening. The camp counselors noticed that he was not at breakfast that morning in the mess hall and began searching for him, asking everyone if they had seen him, but they all said they hadn't seen him all that morning. After looking everywhere around the camp, they notified Leonard Payne, and he quickly organized a search party with several men and dogs and began looking for the boy. It just so happened that on that morning, Lenny and I had gone off hiking along the river. We had no idea that anyone was missing, but as we rounded a bend in the trail, we heard something strange. It sounded like someone calling for help. "Did you hear that?" I asked as Lenny told me to hush and listen, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. When the sound came again, Lenny called back, "Hello!" And then we spied him. This boy was halfway up a twisted old tree on a limb hanging out over the water, clinging to its branches. He was dressed only in his underwear and a dirty, torn t-shirt. He was scratched from head to toe and had leaves in his hair. His eyes were as big as saucers. We hurried across the river in a shallow spot and clambered up the bank to the trunk of the tree. We looked up at him. "How did you get up there?" I asked, trying not to laugh as the boy looked down at me. His eyes were pitiful. "I climbed up when that bear came after me," he said, as Lenny began to climb up toward the boy and help him down to the ground again. The boy's name was Eddie, and he told us he'd gotten up in the middle of the night to go to the outhouse at camp. But, he said, when he came back out the door of the outhouse, there was a bear. He said the bear chased him and he panicked. Instead of running back toward his cabin as he should have done or going back into the outhouse, Eddie said he lost his sense of direction and all sense of reason and ran toward the river. He said the bear continued to chase him a long way and that he'd hidden under rocks and crossed the water several times trying to get away from him, but the bear always found him again, snorting and huffing like a big dog. Then, when it almost seemed the bear had him, Eddie said he'd spied that tree and he climbed up. He said he threw pine cones and sticks at the bear until it finally gave up and rambled off somewhere else. But then he said he couldn't get back down. "Well, you're safe now," Lenny said, as we walked Eddie back upriver toward the tavern and took him inside the kitchen, where Miss Hattie exclaimed when she saw him that he must have been the boy they were searching for. She got Eddie into a warm bath and gave him some of Lenny's spare clothes to wear and fed him a good lunch while we waited for someone to return from the search party. She called the camp, and after a while, Lenny's dad and a camp counselor showed up at the tavern, overjoyed to see that Eddie was no worse for wear, and congratulated us for finding him as he told them his story about being chased by the bear. We got a big surprise that next day. The camp invited Lenny and I to go and spend the night with them the following week as a reward for finding Eddie. We went canoeing with Eddie on the river, rode horses, and ended the day with a hot dog cookout around a campfire. We sang songs and told stories and painted our faces, and it was so much fun. That was also the summer the gypsies came to the mountain. I had heard stories about them, how they would come up the pass in their brightly covered wagons in a long caravan, that they would camp beside the river just beside Gray House in an open field where the tent revivals and carnivals were always held. Miss Hattie said Aldous Wells had struck a bargain of some sort with them years before, and they'd always camped in his field. I was excited to go and see them, but Miss Hattie didn't like that idea at all and told us she'd best not catch us going off down there, that gypsies were known to be children and chicken snatchers, and said some of them were even thieves too, and that they would rob you blind. Aunt Mary hid all of her jewelry, and Hattie stowed away all their good silver while the gypsies were on the mountain, and locked the tavern doors. But despite her warnings, Lenny and I snuck off that Saturday afternoon just after dinner and went to see for ourselves. It was just about dusk as we crept along the riverbank past Gray House and found a spot there in the woods that was cool and covered in moss. We sat down and watched them light their campfire, and then a man dressed in a bright red shirt and bandana began to play his fiddle, and another man joined in on a mandolin. A young boy began to beat a drum, and then the women began to dance around the fire in their colorful skirts, twirling and swirling in the light, their hands held high above their heads as they turned and twirled. It was a wonderful sight to see, and we were all caught up in watching them and listening to the music when Aldous Wells stepped up behind us, and I turned to let out a gasp. "I'll bet someone told you not to come here," he remarked, kneeling down beside us as I nodded my head. "Yes, sir, Miss Hattie said we shouldn't, but I just had to see them," I said. I gazed back toward the scene again. "Well, you've both seen them," he said. "Now it's time for you to go." We both got to our feet. He pointed toward the trail. "I'll see you all tomorrow," he said as we raced off home. When we came through the kitchen door, Uncle John asked where we'd been, and I said, "Why, talking with Aldous Wells." And that seemed to satisfy him, so he returned to his reading. After all, it hadn't been a lie. Then he said, "You didn't happen to see any gypsies when you were talking to Aldous, did you?" And neither one of us hung around to answer. We ran from the room. I ran my bath in the tub, and Lenny had his before we settled in to play a game of Go Fish on the bed in my room. "They sure were pretty, those dancing ladies," Lenny said, and I had to agree that they had been very beautiful with their long dark hair and their brightly colored clothing and their scarves. That night in bed, I could still hear their music through the open window of my room, and I could smell the smoke from their campfire.